There is one natural compound hiding inside your everyday cup of coffee that a real 12-week human study linked to losing visceral fat, the dangerous fat that wraps around your belly. It's not caffeine, and it's not some rare exotic ingredient you've never heard of or seen advertised in a flashy late-night commercial. It's called chlorogenic acid, and it's naturally found in coffee beans, especially lighter roasted ones. In this video, you'll learn what chlorogenic acid actually is, what a real controlled study found when people drank it daily for 12 weeks, exactly how it seems to work inside your body, and the honest limits of what it can and can't do for belly fat as you get older. Let's start with the plain truth, because you deserve honesty before anything else. No single ingredient in coffee melts belly fat away on its own like some magic switch. Belly fat, especially the deeper visceral fat around your organs, is shaped by how much you eat, how active you are, how well you sleep, how sensitive your body is to insulin, and how much muscle you have left as you age. For older adults specifically, this gets even more complicated because the real problem usually isn't just extra fat. It's extra fat combined with less muscle, a combination doctors sometimes call sarcopenic obesity. So think of chlorogenic acid as one small, helpful piece inside a much bigger picture, not a miracle cure standing on its own. Let's talk about what chlorogenic acid actually is in the simplest way possible, without any confusing scientific jargon getting in the way. It's a natural compound found in coffee beans, part of a whole family of similar compounds that all get grouped together because they share similar effects in the body. Here's something most people don't know. Roasting your coffee beans actually lowers the amount of chlorogenic acid inside them. Darker roasted coffee generally contains less chlorogenic acid than lighter roasted coffee, even though the caffeine level doesn't necessarily change the same way. So if this compound is what you're interested in, lighter roasts are naturally going to contain more of it than a dark, heavily roasted blend. Now here's the study that makes this whole topic worth talking about in the first place. In 2019, researchers ran a randomized, double-blind, controlled trial, which is simply the gold standard way scientists test whether something actually works. They took 150 healthy men and women who were overweight, with a body mass index between 25 and just under 30. One group drank instant coffee with a high amount of chlorogenic acid, 369 milligrams per serving, once a day. The other group drank a control coffee with a much smaller amount, just 35 milligrams per serving, roughly a tenth of what the higher dose group received each day. Both groups drank their assigned coffee once daily for 12 full weeks, and 142 people completed the entire study from start to finish without dropping out along the way. Here's what they found. Compared to the control group, the higher chlorogenic acid group showed significantly bigger reductions in visceral fat, total abdominal fat, overall body weight, and waist circumference. Let's put a real number on that, because vague claims don't mean much without specifics. The higher chlorogenic acid group lost about 9 square centimeters of visceral fat area on average over those 12 weeks. The control group only lost about 1 square centimeter in that same time period. That's roughly a 9 times bigger reduction in visceral fat, just from drinking coffee with more of this one natural compound in it every day for 3 months straight. And importantly, the study reported no severe adverse events in either group, meaning it appeared to be a genuinely safe approach for the overweight adults who took part in this particular trial. Now let's get into why this might actually be happening inside the body, because the mechanism here is genuinely interesting and it goes far beyond just feeling more awake from caffeine. The first mechanism involves something called AMPK, which scientists often describe as your cell's internal energy sensor. Think of AMPK like a switch inside every cell that decides whether your body leans toward burning energy or storing it. When AMPK gets activated, your cells tend to lean toward burning fat for fuel and processing glucose more efficiently, instead of stockpiling extra energy as fat. Research suggests chlorogenic acid may help nudge this switch in a favorable direction, supporting fat burning and better glucose handling at the same time. There's also a related piece of this puzzle called carnitine palmitoyltransferase 1, which is basically the gatekeeper that lets fatty acids into your mitochondria, the tiny engines inside your cells that actually burn fuel for energy. Some research suggests chlorogenic acid may support this gatekeeper process too, which is part of why the mitochondria and metabolism angle is a fair, evidence-backed way to describe what's happening, rather than an exaggerated marketing claim you'd normally see slapped onto a random supplement bottle. The second mechanism is about blood sugar, and this one matters a lot as people get older. Chlorogenic acid appears to reduce how much glucose your intestines absorb after a meal, which can help blunt the sudden blood sugar spikes that often follow eating carbohydrates. It may also affect an enzyme involved in how much glucose your liver releases into your bloodstream. Here's why that matters specifically for older adults. As we age, our muscles naturally start losing mass, and muscle is one of the biggest places in the body where glucose actually gets used up and cleared out of the bloodstream. Less muscle generally means your body becomes less efficient at handling blood sugar, which makes insulin resistance more likely, and insulin resistance is one of the biggest reasons stubborn belly fat becomes so much harder to shift with age. A compound that modestly helps improve glucose handling could, in theory, help offset part of that age-related shift, even if the effect isn't dramatic on its own. The third mechanism involves inflammation, and this one deserves attention because visceral fat isn't just sitting there quietly doing nothing. Visceral fat is metabolically active tissue, meaning it actually produces inflammatory signals that circulate through your body and affect how the rest of your metabolism functions. Chlorogenic acid has shown antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties in research, and scientists believe these effects may work through specific pathways in your cells that reduce inflammatory signaling and oxidative stress. That's a big part of why researchers keep studying this compound in relation to obesity, blood sugar problems, and even liver health, not just for one narrow reason, but because it seems to touch several connected systems in the body at once. A broader systematic review published in 2024 pulled together multiple human and preclinical findings and reached a similar conclusion, linking chlorogenic acid to improvements in waist circumference, better glucose handling, and favorable shifts in inflammation and oxidative stress markers across several different studies, not just the single 12-week trial we already covered. That kind of supporting evidence from multiple angles is exactly what makes a compound worth taking seriously, rather than dismissing it as just another passing coffee trend with no real substance behind it. Now, here's an important nuance that makes chlorogenic acid a smarter angle than just talking about caffeine, because coffee is never really just one single ingredient. Regular coffee also contains caffeine, along with several other natural compounds. Caffeine itself can give you a short-term boost in calorie burning and fat use, but your body builds up tolerance to that effect the more regularly you drink coffee, so the real long-term impact tends to be pretty modest. Higher doses of caffeine also come with real downsides, especially for older adults, including jitters, disrupted sleep, a racing heart, and in some cases, increased anxiety. That's exactly why chlorogenic acid deserves its own spotlight separate from caffeine. The part of coffee that people usually notice, the jittery buzz, isn't the same part of coffee that showed up strongly in that visceral fat study. The quieter, unnoticed compound working in the background is where the more interesting story about metabolism actually seems to be happening. Let's talk honestly about the limits here too, because a responsible video doesn't oversell the science. Much of the deeper mechanism research on chlorogenic acid comes from cell studies and animal studies, where the exact doses and conditions don't perfectly match everyday human life. Human studies also use different forms of this compound. Enriched coffee like the one in that 2019 trial, green coffee extract supplements, or mixed multi-ingredient products. And these different forms don't necessarily behave identically inside your body. There's also the question of how well your body actually absorbs chlorogenic acid in the first place, since research suggests part of it is absorbed early in digestion, and part of it gets processed further along by the bacteria living in your gut, meaning the effect might genuinely vary somewhat from person to person depending on their gut microbiome, their diet, and even the specific form of coffee or supplement they choose to use. And remember, roasting changes how much chlorogenic acid survives in your coffee, so a heavily dark roasted cup might not deliver anywhere near the same amount as the specially enriched instant coffee used in that clinical trial, which is worth keeping in mind the next time you're choosing a bag of beans off the shelf. Here's another honest point worth making clearly. Resting metabolism doesn't collapse overnight the moment you turn 50 or 60, even though a lot of internet claims make it sound that dramatic and sudden. What actually changes with age is more gradual. Your body composition shifts, your activity levels often decrease, hormones change slowly over time, and muscle mass tends to decline year after year if it isn't actively maintained through exercise and enough protein in your diet. That gradual muscle loss is a much bigger piece of the belly fat puzzle for older adults than any single ingredient could ever be on its own, no matter how promising the underlying research on that ingredient might sound. So the honest way to think about chlorogenic acid isn't as a way to reverse aging overnight. It's better understood as one small, real, research-supported tool that may help support better metabolic control inside a body that naturally becomes a little less forgiving with each passing year. And that honest framing is far more useful than another exaggerated promise you'll forget by next week. Now let's talk safety, because that matters just as much as effectiveness, especially for older adults. In the 12-week controlled trial we covered earlier, researchers reported no severe adverse events in either group, which is a genuinely reassuring safety signal for a natural coffee compound. That said, coffee tolerance varies enormously from person to person. Some older adults may experience shakiness, anxiety, more frequent nighttime bathroom trips, acid reflux, or disrupted sleep from the caffeine portion of coffee, long before chlorogenic acid becomes any kind of limiting factor at all, which is exactly why paying attention to your own personal tolerance matters more than chasing any specific dosage number you read online. Green coffee extract supplements specifically can also vary widely in quality, dosage, and how much caffeine they still contain alongside the chlorogenic acid. So reading labels carefully matters if you're considering a supplement rather than just drinking your coffee as usual. It's also worth noting that very high concentrated intakes of chlorogenic acid-rich products have occasionally raised questions in research about certain blood markers like homocysteine. Though typical, everyday dietary amounts from regular coffee consumption appear broadly safe for most healthy adults based on current evidence. So here's the real, honest bottom line for anyone looking for one credible ingredient story instead of another miracle countdown list. Chlorogenic acid is a coffee-native compound with a plausible multi-part mechanism involving AMPK activation, better glucose handling, and reduced inflammation, backed by at least one solid 12-week human trial showing real, measurable reductions in visceral and abdominal fat among overweight adults. The honest limits matter just as much. That specific study wasn't done on seniors directly. The effect size was meaningful but modest, and absolutely no single ingredient can override poor sleep, constant overeating, inactivity, heavy alcohol use, or ongoing muscle loss as you age. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. The smartest question about your morning coffee isn't whether it contains a hidden fat-burning secret. It's whether one of coffee's naturally occurring compounds can gently improve the metabolic conditions that make belly fat easier to hold on to as you get older. And based on the actual research we just walked through, the honest answer is possibly yes, modestly, and only as one piece of a much bigger daily routine. It's also worth understanding why chlorogenic acid beats out some of the other popular single-ingredient options you might have heard about for this exact same purpose. L-carnitine, for example, has a genuinely strong connection to mitochondria since it plays a central role in transporting fatty acids into those tiny cellular engines to be burned for energy. But L-carnitine isn't naturally tied to coffee at all, and the weight loss evidence behind it as a standalone supplement remains fairly modest. Medium-chain triglycerides, often added directly to coffee by people chasing energy and focus, have a much cleaner story as a coffee addition, but their actual effect on weight is also modest, and they add real calories every time you use them. Coenzyme Q10 is relevant to mitochondrial energy production and aging in general, but it doesn't have nearly the same direct connection to abdominal fat reduction that chlorogenic acid does. Chlorogenic acid sits in a genuine sweet spot among all of these options. It's naturally part of coffee itself, it has a believable multi-part mechanism, and it's backed by at least one real human trial, specifically measuring abdominal fat. If you want to know exactly how to choose a coffee that actually preserves more of this compound, and the specific roast and brewing details that make the biggest difference, that's exactly what we're covering in the next video. Watch it next, because the difference between a coffee that helps and one that doesn't often comes down to a single choice you're making every single morning without even realizing it.